Cracking like a rifle shot over the dusty Wyoming town square, the auctioneer's heavy wooden gavel slammed down. Anna clutched her youngest child to her chest, her heart shattering as the opening bid for her 12-year-old son rang out. By the cruel laws of the territory, her dead husband's debts meant her family was about to be torn apart, sold off as indentured labor. A banker sneered, ready to take the boy, while a saloon owner eyed her daughter. But before the gavel could fall a second time, a massive, scarred man in buckskin stepped out of the wilderness shadows. He threw a heavy leather pouch of pure gold dust onto the auction block, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that froze the blood of every man present. "I'll take her, and every single one of her children." The year was 1878, and the town of Bitter Creek, Wyoming, was a place where mercy went to die. Built on the edge of the unforgiving Absaroka mountain range, it was a settlement of hard rock miners, ruthless cattle barons, and opportunists. For Anna Montgomery, it had just become hell on earth. Anna stood on the rough-hewn wooden planks of the town square's auction block, the brutal August sun beating down on her faded gingham dress. She was 28 years old, recently widowed, and entirely alone. Beside her huddled her 4 children, 12-year-old Thomas trying desperately to look brave, 9-year-old Sarah weeping silently into her mother's skirt, 5-year-old Will, and baby Emma asleep in Anna's trembling arms. Her husband, Arthur Montgomery, had died under mysterious circumstances 3 weeks prior, his wagon found smashed at the bottom of a ravine. But Arthur hadn't just left her a widow, he had left her buried beneath a mountain of debt owed to Bitter Creek's most powerful and corrupt figure, Mayor Josiah Higgins. Higgins wasn't just the mayor. He owned the bank, the general store, and the corrupt sheriff who enforced his will. When Anna couldn't pay the exorbitant $1,500 Arthur supposedly owed, Higgins invoked an archaic, brutal, territorial law. The debt would be settled through indentured servitude, but Higgins had no use for a family unit. He intended to auction them off piecemeal. "Do I hear $50 for the oldest boy?" shouted the auctioneer, a sweaty, balding man named Cobb. "Look at the shoulders on him. Good for the mines, good for the fields." "50, shouted a foreman from the nearby copper syndicate. Anna squeezed her eyes shut, a breathless sob tearing at her throat. "Please," she whispered, looking toward Mayor Higgins, who sat in a shaded chair on the boardwalk, smoking a long cigar. "Please, Mr. Higgins, let me work it off. Don't take my children. I'll wash clothes, I'll scrub floors." "You owe too much, Mrs. Montgomery," Higgins drawled, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "This is the only legal way. The boy goes to the mines, the girl will make a fine scullery maid at the hotel, and I'm sure someone will take you and the little ones off my hands." "$75 for the boy," another voice yelled. Thomas looked up at his mother, his lower lip trembling. Anna pulled him tight against her side. The crowd of townsfolk muttered, some looking away in shame, others watching with cold, calculating eyes. This was the frontier, survival of the fittest, and the Montgomery family had just become prey. "Going once for 75, Cobb bellowed, raising the gavel. "Going twice." The sound of heavy, spurred boots striking the wooden boardwalk echoed like a death knell. The crowd parted instantly, murmurs dying in their throats. A man stepped into the blinding sunlight of the square. He was a giant of a man, easily standing 6'4", wearing a long coat of tanned elk hide fringed with beads, a wide-brimmed felt hat pulled low over his eyes. A thick, dark beard obscured the lower half of his face, but his eyes, striking ice-pale blue, pierced through the crowd with the intensity of a hunting wolf. Slung over his shoulder was a customized Winchester repeating rifle, and a heavy Bowie knife rested on his hip. It was Jebby Boone. Everyone in Bitter Creek knew the name, though few had ever spoken to the man. He was a mountain man, a solitary trapper who lived high in the impassable peaks of the Absaroka. Rumors swirled around him like mountain mist, that he was a former Texas Ranger who had killed a dozen men, that he had lived with the Cheyenne, that he was more animal than man. He came down to the town twice a year to trade furs for coffee, salt, and ammunition, and he never stayed longer than an hour. Jebby walked straight past the armed deputies, who instinctively stepped back, intimidated by the sheer, imposing mass of him. He stopped directly in front of the auction block. He didn't look at Anna. His pale eyes locked onto Mayor Higgins. "The auction is closed," Jebby said. His voice wasn't a shout, but a deep, gravelly baritone that carried over the dead silent square. Higgins sat up straight, his cigar pausing halfway to his mouth. "Boone, this is town business, legal business. The widow Montgomery owes my bank $1,500. Jebby reached inside his heavy coat. Several deputies put their hands on their holsters, but Jebby didn't draw a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a thick, stained leather pouch. With a flick of his massive wrist, he tossed it onto the wooden podium next to the auctioneer. It hit the wood with a heavy metallic thud that made the podium groan. "There's 50 ounces of pure placer gold in that bag," Jebby said, his eyes never leaving Higgins. "Worth over $1,600. Count it if you want. But if any man here tries to put a bid on these children, I'll take his head off before the gavel drops." The crowd gasped. Mayor Higgins stood up, his face flushing crimson. "You can't just buy a family, Boone. What do you intend to do with them?" Jebby finally turned his gaze to Anna. Anna shrank back, terrified. The man looked like a savage, wild and untamed. Yet when his blue eyes met hers, she saw no cruelty, only a strange, deep sorrow. "I'm settling the debt," Jebby said loudly, making sure every person in the square heard him. "I'll take her, and every one of her children. They come with me." Higgins walked over, untied the leather pouch, and peered inside. The unmistakable yellow gleam of gold dust and nuggets reflected in the harsh sunlight. Higgins swallowed hard, his greed warring with his pride. "The debt is settled," the mayor spat. "But mark my words, Boone, you're taking on trouble. A widow and 4 mouths to feed up in the high country, they'll be dead before the first snow." "That's my concern," Jebby said. He turned to the auction block and held out a massive, calloused hand toward Anna. "Gather your kin, ma'am. We ride before noon." Anna sat rigid on the hard wooden seat of the buckboard wagon, clutching baby Emma. Behind her, among sacks of flour, coffee, and bundled furs, sat Thomas, Sarah, and little Will. At the reins sat Jebby Boone, driving a team of massive draft horses away from the dust of Bitter Creek and toward the looming, jagged silhouettes of the mountains. Panic fluttered in Anna's chest like a trapped bird. She had escaped the auction block, but what had she traded it for? A life of slavery in the wilderness, a mountain man who bought her like cattle. Stories of men who went mad in the isolation of the mountains flashed through her mind. She considered grabbing the reins and making a run for it. But where would she go? Higgins owned the law. For the first 4 hours, Jebby didn't say a single word. He expertly guided the wagon up the steepening, rocky trails, his eyes scanning the tree line. "Mr. Boone," Anna finally said, her voice shaking but determined. I need to know your intentions. If you expect me to be a wife to you, or if you plan to work my children to the bone to pay off that gold." "I don't want a wife, Mrs. Montgomery," Jebby interrupted, his voice surprisingly soft despite its gravelly texture. "And children shouldn't do a man's work." "Then why?" Anna demanded, frustration temporarily overcoming her fear. "Why would a stranger part with a fortune in gold for a family he doesn't know?" Jebby kept his eyes on the trail. "Your husband, Arthur, he was a good man." Anna blinked in shock. "You knew Arthur?" "We crossed paths," was all Jebby said, his jaw tightening beneath his beard. He snapped the reins, signaling an end to the conversation. As the sun began to dip behind the peaks, casting long purple shadows across the pine forests, they reached the crossing at Roaring Fork River. The water was running high and fast, swollen from late summer glacial melt. The roar of the rapids was deafening. Jebby halted the wagon. He climbed down, the water rushing around his tall boots, inspecting the treacherous ford. Anna watched him, her heart in her throat. "Everyone hold tight," Jebby ordered, climbing back up. "It's gonna be rough." He urged the horses into the freezing, churning water. The wagon lurched violently, the wooden wheels slipping on slick river stones. Water rushed over the floorboards, soaking Anna's boots. Sarah screamed as a sudden plunge sent the wagon tilting dangerously to the left. Crack! The sound of splintering wood echoed above the roar of the river. The left rear wheel had wedged into a deep crevice between two boulders, and the immense pressure of the current was threatening to snap the axle and overturn the wagon, spilling them all into the deadly rapids. "Thomas, take the reins," Jebby shouted. Before the boy could fully react, Jebby shoved the leather straps into Thomas's hands and vaulted over the side of the wagon into the freezing, chest-deep water. Anna screamed his name, terrified he would be swept away. But Jebby didn't fall. He waded against the brutal current, his massive shoulders corded with muscle as he reached the rear of the wagon. He shoved his hands under the submerged axle. With a primal roar that rivaled the sound of the river, Jebby Boone leveraged his entire body weight, veins bulging on his neck, and hoisted the heavy oak wagon upward. "Pull, boy! Here!" Jebby yelled. Thomas, pale but resolute, slapped the reins. "Here!" The horses surged forward, and with Jebby lifting the trapped wheel free, the wagon lurched out of the crevice and scrambled up the muddy opposite bank, pulling to a safe stop. Anna gasped for air, looking back. Jebby trudged out of the water, soaked to the bone, water pouring from his beard and coat. He didn't look angry. He didn't curse. He simply walked over to the side of the wagon, checked on the wheel, and then looked at the children. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carved wooden bear, handing it to 5-year-old Will, who was crying. "River's just noisy, little man," Jebby said gently. "Nothing to be scared of." Anna watched him, astounded. The terrifying giant from the auction block was dripping wet, yet taking the time to comfort a terrified child. That night, they made camp in a sheltered grove of ancient pines. Jebby built a roaring fire and cooked thick slabs of cured venison and flatbread. He served the children first, ensuring they ate their fill before taking a single bite himself. As the children fell asleep beneath heavy bear fur blankets, Anna sat by the fire, watching Jebby oil his rifle. "Thank you," Anna said softly. "For today." At the river, Jebby paused, looking at her through the dancing flames. "The mountain don't care if you're a good person or a bad one, Mrs. Montgomery. It only cares if you're strong enough to survive it. I'm just making sure you folks survive." "You still haven't told me the truth," Anna pushed gently. $1,600 is a lifetime of wealth. You didn't give that up just because you crossed paths with my husband." Jebby stared into the fire for a long, heavy moment. He looked older than his years, haunted by ghosts Anna couldn't see. "Get some sleep, Anna," he said, using her first name for the first time. "We reach the cabin by noon tomorrow. Then I'll show you why I came for you." By midday the following afternoon, the wagon crested a steep ridge, and the dense forest suddenly gave way to a breathtaking clearing. Hidden in a high alpine valley, surrounded by towering, snow-capped peaks, sat Jebby's home. Anna had expected a crude, drafty shack. Instead, she gasped in awe. The cabin was a masterpiece of frontier engineering, built from massive, perfectly notched pine logs. It had a stone chimney, real glass in the windows, and a wide, sturdy porch. Nearby stood a secure smokehouse, a well-built barn, and a corral containing 3 mules and a milking cow. It wasn't just a trapper's camp. It was a fortress built to withstand the harshest winters and any unwanted visitors. "Welcome to Widow's Peak," Jebby said quietly, halting the horses. Over the next few days, a strange but peaceful routine settled over the cabin. To Anna's immense relief, Jebby was a man of total respect. He gave Anna and the children the large main bedroom, complete with feather mattresses, while he slept on a simple cot near the hearth. He spent his days chopping wood, hunting, and teaching Thomas how to track rabbits in the brush. Little Will trailed behind the giant man like a shadow, and even shy Sarah began to laugh again. But the mystery of Jebby Boone gnawed at Anna. Who was he, really? And what was the connection to her dead husband? The answer came on the 4th afternoon. Jebby was out checking his perimeter traps, leaving Anna alone in the cabin to sweep the floors. As she moved a heavy oak chest near Jebby's cot to sweep behind it, the lid bumped open. Anna knew it was wrong to pry, but a glint of silver caught her eye. Sitting on top of a stack of folded maps and ledger books was a pocket watch. Anna's breath hitched. She dropped her broom, her hands shaking as she reached into the chest and picked up the watch. It was heavy, sterling silver, with a distinct dent on the side casing. She pressed the latch. The cover popped open, revealing the delicate clock face and the engraving on the inside lid. To Arthur, forever yours, Anna, 1868. It was her husband's watch, the watch he had been wearing the day he died. Tears welled in Anna's eyes, followed quickly by a rising tide of panic. The sheriff had told her Arthur's body had been found stripped of valuables, likely robbed by highwaymen before the wagon crashed. How did Jebby have it? Was he the one who robbed Arthur? Was this whole rescue a twisted game played by her husband's killer? The heavy wooden door creaked open. Jebby stood in the frame, carrying an armful of chopped wood. He froze when he saw Anna standing by his chest, tears streaming down her face, the silver watch clutched tightly in her fist. He slowly set the wood down, his face unreadable. "You killed him," Anna whispered, stepping back, grabbing the heavy iron fire poker from the hearth. "You killed Arthur. That's why you bought us. Guilt, or to silence us." Jebby didn't move. He took off his hat, running a hand through his thick, dark hair. He let out a long, heavy sigh that sounded like a mountain wind. "Put the iron down, Anna, please." "Tell me," she screamed, the betrayal cutting deeper than the grief. "How do you have his watch?" "Because he gave it to me," Jebby said, his voice thick with emotion. He walked slowly to the wooden dining table and sat heavily in a chair, looking utterly defeated. "He gave it to me right before he took his last breath." Anna froze, the poker still raised. "What are you talking about?" Jebby looked up, his pale blue eyes shining with unshed tears. "Arthur didn't die in a wagon accident, Anna. He was murdered." Anna's knees went weak. She lowered the poker, leaning against the stone mantel for support. "Murdered? By who?" "By Mayor Higgins' men," Jebby said, his voice hardening into cold steel. He pointed to the oak chest. "Look under the maps, Anna. Bring the black ledger here." Numbly, Anna did as instructed. She pulled out a leather-bound journal and carried it to the table. "Arthur came up this mountain about a month ago," Jebby explained. "He was prospecting, trying to find a way to pay off the debts Higgins kept piling on him. But Arthur didn't find gold. He found something much more valuable to a man like Higgins." Jebby tapped the black ledger. "Higgins has been forging land deeds. He's been stealing property from homesteaders, forcing them into debt, and then claiming their land to sell to the Union Pacific Railroad, which is secretly planning a spur line right through Bitter Creek. Arthur found the surveyor markers and the real, original deeds hidden in an abandoned surveyor's camp up near the ridge." Anna opened the ledger. Inside were undeniable records, maps, and stolen land titles, proof that Higgins was a thief and a fraud. "Arthur was coming back to town to expose him," Jebby continued. "But Higgins' deputies caught him on the mountain road. They shot him. I heard the gunfire from my ridge. By the time I got down there, the deputies had pushed his wagon into the ravine to make it look like a crash. I climbed down to him. He was dying." Jebby's voice cracked. "I held him, Anna, a man I barely knew. He pressed that silver watch and this ledger into my hands. He made me swear a blood oath. He said, 'They'll come for Anna. They'll take my children to cover the debt. Don't let them take my family.' Then he died." Anna collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. The image of her gentle Arthur dying alone in a ravine broke her heart all over again. But alongside the grief, a fierce, protective rage began to burn. Jebby reached across the table, his massive hand gently covering hers. "I'm not a good man, Anna. I've done terrible things in my past, things I came to this mountain to hide from. But I keep my oaths. I went to town to kill Higgins, but I saw you on that auction block. I had to get you out first." Anna looked up at him, finally seeing the man clearly. He wasn't a savage. He was a guardian, a shield standing between her family and the corruption of the world. "What do we do now?" Anna asked, wiping her tears, her voice finding a new, hardened strength. Before Jebby could answer, the distant, unmistakable crack of a rifle echoed through the valley. The glass in the front window shattered inward raining shards across the wooden floor. Jebby was on his feet in a microsecond, flipping the heavy oak table over to form a barricade, pulling Anna down behind it. He snatched his Winchester from the wall, levering around into the chamber with a deadly clack. "Higgins," Jebby growled, his eyes narrowing as he peered through the shattered window at the tree line below. He realized the gold I paid with was from the same stream where Arthur was killed. "He knows I have the ledger." Anna clutched Jebby's arm, terrified for her children, who were playing out back near the barn. "Stay down," Jebby commanded, the former Texas Ranger replacing the quiet mountain man. He looked at Anna, his ice blue eyes burning with a lethal fire. "They think they've come to hunt a trapper. They're about to find out why the Indians call me the Grizzly of the Absaroka." The sharp, concussive boom of a Sharp's buffalo rifle tore through the alpine air, shattering the momentary silence. A massive .50 caliber slug punched through the heavy oak door of the cabin, burying itself deep into the stone of the hearth, spraying Anna with a fine mist of pulverized rock. "To the cellar," Jebby roared, his voice cutting through the ringing in Anna's ears. He grabbed her by the waist, lifting her effortlessly, and tossed her behind the safety of the heavy iron cookstove. "My children," Anna screamed, her eyes wide with terror. "They're in the barn." Jebby's jaw clenched. He peered through a narrow gun port he had carved into the side of the window frame. Down at the edge of the tree line, about 200 yards away, he could see the muzzle flashes of at least 8 men. Mayor Josiah Higgins had brought his personal army of corrupt deputies and hired guns. "Stay down," Jebby commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. He moved with a terrifying, fluid grace that belied his massive size. He snatched a bandolier of cartridges from a peg on the wall, slinging it over his broad chest. "I'm going to lay down cover fire. When I shout, you run out the back door, keep low behind the woodpile, and get to the barn. Lock them in the root cellar beneath the stalls." Anna nodded, her hands trembling as she pulled her shawl tight. The widow from Bitter Creek was gone. In her place was a mother fighting for her blood. "I'm ready." Jebby kicked away the overturned table and stepped right into the open frame of the shattered window. He didn't hide. He raised the Winchester 1873 repeating rifle to his shoulder and unleashed hell. The rifle barked, a rapid, relentless rhythm of fire and brass. Jebby pumped the lever so fast it was a blur. Crack, clack, crack, clack, crack. He wasn't just shooting blindly. He was aiming with the deadly precision of a seasoned Texas Ranger. A man behind a distant pine tree screamed and dropped his rifle, clutching a shattered shoulder. Another deputy, trying to flank through the tall grass, was thrown backward as Jebby's bullet caught him square in the chest. "Now, Anna, go!" Jebby bellowed. Anna scrambled up, throwing the heavy iron latch of the back door, and bolted into the sunlight. Bullets whipped past her, sounding like angry hornets. Dirt kicked up at her heels. She dove behind the massive stacks of chopped cordwood, gasping for air. Before sprinting the last 20 yards to the barn doors, she hauled them open, practically falling inside. "Thomas, Sarah," she screamed into the dusty, hay-scented gloom. "Ma," Thomas yelled, emerging from an empty horse stall, clutching little Will and dragging Sarah behind him. Baby Emma was strapped to his chest in a makeshift sling. "Into the cellar, right now," Anna ordered. ushering her children toward the heavy wooden trapdoor in the floorboards. She shoved them down the ladder into the cold, dark potato cellar, pulling the heavy door shut above them, just as a bullet punched through the barn siding, sending splinters raining down on her hair. Anna didn't cower in the barn. She found a heavy iron pitchfork and Arthur's old Colt Army revolver wrapped in an oilcloth in the wagon bed. Her hands shook, but she gripped the heavy gun, cocked the hammer, and sprinted back to the cabin. She kicked the back door open to find Jebby pinned down. The overwhelming firepower of Higgins' men had forced him behind the stone fireplace. The cabin was taking a beating. Bullets chewed the pine logs, shattering clay pots and ripping through the feather mattresses. "I told you to stay with them," Jebby yelled over the din, reloading his Winchester through the side gate with lightning speed. "I won't let you fight them alone," Anna fired back, sliding across the floor to join him behind the stone hearth. She held up the heavy Colt. "Arthur taught me how to shoot." Jebby looked at her, his icy blue eyes widening in surprise. Then a slow, grim smile broke through his thick beard. "Hold the left window. Don't shoot unless they cross the creek." For the next 2 hours, the siege of Widow's Peak dragged on into a brutal stalemate. Jebby's superior position and unparalleled marksmanship kept Higgins' men pinned in the trees, but the sheer numbers were against them. The air inside the cabin grew thick and choking with the acrid smell of burnt cordite. Suddenly, the gunfire from the tree line ceased. An eerie, ringing silence fell over the valley. "Hold your fire," a voice boomed from the trees. It was Mayor Higgins, using a tin speaking trumpet. "Boone, you're putting up a hell of a fight for a dead man's wife, but I'm losing patience." Jebby didn't answer. He kept his rifle trained on the brush. "I know you have the ledger, Boone," Higgins shouted. "Toss it out the front door, and I'll let you live. You can keep the widow and her brats. Just give me the book." Anna looked at Jebby. The black ledger was sitting in the oak chest. It was the only thing keeping Higgins from stealing the entire valley and destroying countless lives. "He's lying," Anna whispered fiercely. "He'll kill us all the second he has it." "I know," Jebby murmured. He reached into his coat and pulled out Arthur's silver pocket watch, tracing the dented casing with his thumb. A man like Higgins doesn't leave loose ends. "Boone," Higgins' voice echoed again, this time laced with a venomous cruelty. "I see you locked the little ones in the barn. You got 2 minutes to toss that ledger out, or I'm sending men up the back drawer with coal oil. We'll burn the barn to the ground, with those kids inside." Anna's heart stopped. The blood drained from her face. "No," she gasped, dropping her revolver. "Jebby, no, my babies." Jebby's eyes turned entirely cold. The gentle mountain man vanished, replaced by an apex predator. He grabbed Anna's shoulders, his grip firm but grounding. "They are not going to burn that barn," Jebby said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper. "I made a vow to Arthur. I made a vow to you. Stay here. Bar the door." Before Anna could protest, Jebby moved to the rear of the cabin. He didn't go out the door. He pried up 3 loose floorboards beneath his cot, revealing a narrow, dark tunnel he had dug out years ago for exactly this kind of scenario. It led 50 yards up the rocky incline behind the cabin, completely out of sight from the front tree line. He slipped into the dark earth, leaving Anna alone with the silence, the ledger, and the terrifying weight The 2 minutes were up. Anna crouched by the shattered window, gripping the Colt revolver, her knuckles white. She watched the tree line, praying for a miracle. Down in the brush, Higgins signaled to 2 of his deputies, handing them heavy glass jugs, sloshing with yellow coal oil. "Burn it," Higgins sneered. "Smoke the bastard out." The 2 men began to sprint up the far right side of the clearing, using the tall alpine grass for cover, heading straight for the barn. Anna raised her revolver, tears blurring her vision, trying to get a bead on them. But they were too fast, and the distance was too great for a handgun. "God, please," she sobbed. Suddenly, a massive shape dropped from the rocky crag directly above the deputies. Jebby Boone landed with the crushing force of an avalanche. He didn't fire his rifle. He used it like a club, bringing the heavy wooden stock down on the first deputy's head with a sickening crack. The man dropped instantly. The second deputy fumbled for his pistol, but Jebby grabbed the man by the throat, hoisting him off his feet with one arm, and hurled him backward into a pine tree. The jug of coal oil shattered against the trunk, soaking the unconscious man. Higgins watched in horror from the safety of his rock outcropping. "Shoot him! Shoot him!" he screamed to his remaining men. But as the deputies turned their rifles toward Jebby, a new sound cut through the valley. It wasn't the crack of a rifle, but the thunderous, rhythmic drumming of dozens of horse hooves. Over the western ridge, a posse of 20 armed men crest the hill, riding hard. But these weren't Higgins' men. They wore matching dusters, and at the front rode a man with a gleaming silver star pinned to his lapel, holding a lever action rifle in the air. "Federal Marshals," the lead rider bellowed. "Throw down your weapons, now!" It was none other than Charlie Siringo, the legendary operative for the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, temporarily deputized by the U.S. Marshals Service. For 6 months, Siringo had been secretly tracking a massive land fraud scheme tied to the Union Pacific Railroad expansion. His investigation had led him straight to Bitter Creek, only to find the town empty and the mayor missing. The sound of the mountain gunfight had drawn his posse straight to Widow's Peak. Higgins' men, realizing they were outgunned and facing federal agents, immediately dropped their rifles and raised their hands. Corrupt deputies were cowards at heart, and none of them wanted to swing from a federal gallows. Higgins, however, panicked. Seeing his empire crumbling in seconds, he drew a hidden Derringer pistol from his vest and aimed it squarely at Jebby's back. Bang! A shot rang out, but it didn't come from Higgins. Up in the cabin, Anna stood in the window frame, the smoke curling from the barrel of Arthur's Colt Army revolver. She had taken the shot. The bullet struck the dirt merely an inch from Higgins' boot, kicking up a shower of gravel. It was enough. The mayor flinched, dropping the small pistol. In a flash, Jebby crossed the distance, grabbed Higgins by the lapels of his expensive suit, and slammed him against a boulder, pressing the edge of his massive Bowie knife against the mayor's throat. "Give me one reason, Josiah," Jebby hissed, his eyes blazing with a decade of suppressed rage. "Give me one reason not to balance the scales for Arthur right here." Siringo rode up, pulling his horse to a halt. "Stand down, Boone," the Pinkerton agent ordered, recognizing the famous mountain man. "We've got it from here. We've been building a case on Higgins for months, but we lack the paper trail." Anna walked out of the cabin, her head held high, the heavy black ledger clutched to her chest. She marched straight past the surrendered deputies, straight past Siringo, and stopped in front of Jebi and the trembling mare. "He doesn't have a paper trail, Mr. Siringo," Anna said, her voice carrying the absolute authority of a woman who had survived the fire. "Because I do." She handed the black ledger to the Pinkerton detective. Siringo flipped through the pages, his eyes widening as he saw the forged deeds, the stolen property records, and the detailed bribes. "Well, I'll be damned," Siringo muttered, smiling grimly. "You just bought yourself a one-way ticket to a federal penitentiary, Higgins. Cuff him, boys." As the marshals dragged the kicking and screaming mare away, Jebi sheathed his knife. He looked at Anna, his massive chest heaving. He was covered in dirt, pine needles, and soot, but to Anna, he looked like a knight in tarnished armor. Anna ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist, burying her face in his broad chest. For a moment, Jebi stood stiff, unaccustomed to human touch. Then, slowly, heavily, his massive arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, resting his bearded chin on the top of her head. "You did it," Anna whispered into his coat. "You kept your promise." Later that evening, after Siringo and the posse had taken their prisoners back down the mountain, the valley returned to its peaceful silence. The broken window had been boarded up. The children, safe and oblivious to the true danger they had been in, were asleep in the large bed. Jebi sat on the porch, nursing a cup of black coffee, watching the moon rise over the jagged peaks of the Absaroka. Anna stepped out into the cool night air, wrapping a heavy wool blanket around her shoulders. She sat down next to him on the wooden steps. "Siringo said the ledger clears Arthur's debts," Anna said softly. "The bank has to return all the stolen money. We're wealthy, Jebi. The gold you gave Higgins will be returned to you by the courts." Jebi didn't look away from the moon. "Keep it. It was Arthur's claim anyway. You can take the kids, go back east, buy a fine house in Boston or Philadelphia. Give them a proper life." Anna looked at his rugged profile. She saw the deep loneliness etched into the lines around his eyes. She reached out, her small, soft hand covering his large, calloused one. "A proper life isn't a fine house in a crowded city," Anna said firmly. "A proper life is being somewhere you are safe, somewhere you are loved." Jebi finally turned to look at her, a profound vulnerability in his pale blue eyes. "Anna, I'm a wild man. I don't know how to be a father. I don't know how to be a husband." "You knew how to save us," Anna replied, a soft smile touching her lips. "You knew how to comfort little Will at the river. You knew how to honor my husband's dying wish. You know enough, Jebi Boone. The rest, we can learn together." She leaned in, resting her head against his shoulder. This time, Jebi didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close against the mountain chill. The storm had passed. The debt was paid, and high up in the rugged peaks of the Wyoming Territory, a broken family and a solitary mountain man had finally found their way home. Did Jebi and Anna's fierce fight for justice and survival keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved this thrilling tale of Wild West romance, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds of family, please hit that like button. It helps us bring more incredible stories to life. Share this video with your friends and family who love a true frontier drama. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next epic historical storytelling adventure. Drop a comment below and let us know your favorite moment from Widow's Peak.
Hi, my name is William Sunny, the owner and manager of Iron Cowboy Gardena. After watching the video, father sent his. I'll take her and every one of her children. The mountain man's choice shocked the town. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the powerful feeling of compassion and courage. At a moment when a family was about to be torn apart, one unexpected choice changed everything. Jeb wasn't drawn to Anna and her children because they were easy to help. He stepped forward because it was the right thing to do, even when it came with sacrifice, risk, and responsibility. One lesson I took from this story is that real strength often shows up through protection, loyalty, and keeping your word. Sometimes the people who seem toughest on the outside carry the biggest hearts. What did you think of Jeb's decision to take in the entire family? And which moment in the story made you trust him the most? In everyday life, we may not face the same frontier challenges, but we all have opportunities to help someone who feels alone or overwhelmed. Even a small act of kindness can make a lasting difference. Thank you for spending time with us today. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy these mountain mansies, feel free to like the video or subscribe to Iron Cowboy Gardena for more stories about family, resilience, and unexpected hope.